When I was a kid, we talked about the treaty.
The treaty is a nation-to-nation agreement to share land and to share resources.
Corporations have taken trillions and trillions of dollars out of the land.
They never lived up to their side of their bargain.
This was supposed to be more than just a commercial relationship. It was supposed to be an ongoing relationship.
Treaty is what makes Canada.
It is the fabric of the foundation for which settlement can occur in this area. It allowed for settlement to happen to create the cities and the economic activity that exists. But it did not allow for our people to be erased from being participants in our homelands.
We're the caretakers of the land.
The Council Fire will be the place of renewal, meeting nation to nation to reflect both systems of law.
The obligation to pay treaty annuities has remained with Canada since Confederation.
We need to continue talking about treaties to educate that this land was Anishinaabek territory.
It's about the building of the Anishinaabe identity and purpose as a nation.
January 1493, a year after Columbus arrived, the doctrine of discovery is decreed, the means by which the Crown claims legal title to the New World. The Crown has relied on the doctrine of discovery for its claim of ownership to the land. First Nations across Canada have never accepted this assertion. Dozens of treaties have been entered into between First Nations and the Crown before and after Confederation. First Nations entered treaties with the belief they were sharing the land, not surrendering it. Treaties were a way of life among First Nations long before the ships arrived, with the most important, treaty with Creator and all living things. This is the story of one such treaty, the Robinson Huron Treaty of 1850.
The treaty is a nation-to-nation agreement between the Crown and Right of England and the Anishinaabe people north of Lake Huron. It's a sharing agreement between the two nations to share land and to share resources and to share the wealth of the land in a way that would enable both parties to be able to sustain themselves into the future. The boundary runs roughly from Batchewana Bay to Penetanguishene according to the terms of the treaty, to the shoreline of Lake Huron and northward into Hudson's Bay. The height of land is where the waters start to flow in opposite directions.
The Crown was pushing for more and more settlement as a way to try to secure their title to territories they knew were not their own. As the Crown tried to settle parts of the territory and extract particular resources, they were met with constant confrontation from Anishinaabe leaders and warriors that what they were doing was a violation of our both treaty with creation and that they could not do those things without our permission. The leaders were very clear that they understood the value of their territories and that they opposed anyone engaging in activities in their territories that they would not benefit from.
Who has heard of a treaty before? Yeah? Anybody has never heard of treaty before? All right, we're off to a good start.
Feel free to be creative. I want you to write down some ideas of what treaty means to you and what is a treaty. So I'm gonna give you about 5 to 10 minutes to share those thoughts on that piece of paper. And once that time is up, I'll come around and collect those paper.
When our ancestors thought about 7 generations ahead, I myself think about that. 7 generations that are coming. We have to think about their future as well.
All right, so it looks like our papers are coming together. We're just gonna read off a few of them.
What does treaty mean to me? A relationship between two nations, Anishinaabek settlers. An agreement, learning, understanding, living in harmony together, keeping peace. A relationship between two nations, keeping promises with one another, accept the people for who they are, building relationships, following the agreements on the treaty. So one thing that really was highlighted to me as you were all sharing your various answers was relationships. And that was the most important key thing when it came to the treaty, was making that meaningful relationship between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
This is the understanding of the Anishinaabek. It seems like it was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. But the treaty is still relevant today. So we have been making treaties with other nations, Indigenous nations, for a long time. Anishinaabek made treaties with people. They had these sacred agreements, these understandings, and they're all based in a relationship. Relationships aren't just one-sided, right? Relationships require both parties to work together, hold each other accountable. And so that's part of, this gathering, is when we come together every single year. If you think about the history that's being shared here, we remember about what happened when that treaty was signed.
Our elders have always disputed this idea that we were ever selling our land, because we would never have had the authority to do that. We always have a responsibility to those who came before us, which is those animals and spirits. It's not a commodity, it's not something we can parcel out and sell. Like, we have a relationship with this living entity that we think of as the earth.
As it was planned by the Creator for us to be caretakers of the land. Our ancestors lived on this land, and there's the sacredness of this land, the waters, all the animals. When you think about the four-legged, the swimmers, the crawlers, bird life, everything is connected with spirit.
Surrender? No, it wasn't an absolute surrender. It was a conditional agreement. We give this, you give this. We work together, we create a document of sharing. We give you rights as a people, Anishinaabek give you rights as new people to our lands. That's what the treaty is. We gave them rights. We never gave them 100% of our inheritance.
That we'd always been in relation with other nations, and those relationships were founded on principles of respect and reciprocity, but they were also living relationships that required ongoing renewal. And we brought those values and ideas into our treaties with Canada.
Oh, wow. Whoa.
I don't know too much about the treaty itself. I'm actually a conservator, and our paper conservator is not.
We live and breathe this.
Yeah.
No, actually, you get
So
to
you know,
breathe
you
it.
can tell me.
Yeah.
As part of us sharing this land with the settlers, we put in a clause here. It's called the augmentation clause. Well, as resource extraction was coming, being like mining, forestry, we got a $1 annuity.
Okay.
But it was raised subsequently. As more resource development and extraction was coming, this annuity was supposed to escalate. So there's such a difference right now in our communities and the general public. Right?
Although in some people's eyes, I think it causes controversy for nothing, because while we're in court, it is for that augmentation clause. Everybody else got rich except the First Nations.
There was an initial payment of 2,000 pounds, a commitment to a perpetual annuity of 600 pounds per year, $2,400 at the time for the Anishinaabe of Lake Huron. So starting in 1851, the perpetual annuity would be paid. And the agreement was that the annuity set at 600 pounds at the time, $2,400, and that amounted to roughly $1.60 or $1.70 per person, payable to the chiefs and tribes. Today there are 21 communities which are successors to the initial signatories.
This was just part of a much longer standing practice where leaders were very clear that if there was any activity taking place on Anishinaabe land, that we would be able to benefit from that activity, and more importantly, that our children and grandchildren and future generations would benefit. And so the leaders were so explicit about that in the negotiations that even the Crown's version of that treaty, fixed on paper, acknowledged that the Anishinaabe understood that they would benefit from value derived from their lands. And so that got interpreted in the written treaty as the fact that their annuities would be increased if wealth was derived from their land.
And at the time, the Crown thought that our land was barren and sterile, and they thought nobody would ever want to live in our territory. But the chiefs knew that that wasn't true, and they were thinking, about the future generations, because they had an opportunity to actually make a lot of money in terms of a lump sum for themselves, and they would have had a very comfortable lifestyle. But they turned that down, and they turned it down for future generations.
Treaty Day happens once a year. I always come to pick up my $4, my treaty pay, and it happens like this, in the same protocols. You come in, you show them your ID, then they give you your $4, and that's it. You go home.
$4 isn't sharing. We know that.
It's a shame.
I think it's an insult.
$4 is a joke.
The leasing of Anishinaabe lands enables them to extract the resources from our traditional territories.
The text of the treaty says that the initial payment is 600 pounds, and it would be increased if the wealth from the territory enabled the Crown to do so without incurring a loss, and it would be increased up to $4 per person, roughly.
At the time when the treaty was going to be signed, the chiefs had asked for $10 per person to be paid out because they knew that's what was happening in the States. But the difficulty was that the Crown was broke at the time. And so what ended up being negotiated and agreed to was that there would be this collective amount.
So that kind of is the key clause in that augmentation promise. How much was the obligation to increase beyond £1 or $4 per person?
Only $4.
How can you do it $4?
No, I do nothing. Can't buy not even a loaf of bread out of it.
Too low. But I haven't collected it since I was a kid. I need a car seat for another baby. So maybe it'll be worth it. We'll see.
That $4 represents at that time what
the relationship should have been to take care and to make sure that we're taken care of because we're sharing this land. And today, $4, doesn't even buy you a Starbucks.
As the Crown took the position that it wasn't a legal obligation after $4, they increased it once in 1875 up to $4, and it stayed that way up until the present, even though the wealth from the territory would have allowed the Crown to increase it much earlier.
There's a uranium rush in central Ontario. Mined there is the richest deposit of that well-nigh invaluable mineral, the raw material of atomic power. The world had little use for uranium before the nuclear age. Now it wants every ton that can be obtained. The Ontario discovery dwarfs into insignificance the famous gold rushes of 50 years ago. The output here is 35,000 tons of ore per day. So the new settlement at Elliott Lake is boomtown on a scale never seen before. Already, 25,000 men have surged upon Elliott Lake. Shopping centers have mushroomed in what was a wilderness. A cinema is the modern substitute for the rip-roaring saloons of gold rush days. In no time at all, the place has become a uranium capital. Prosperous Canada has enriched the world.
The wealth generated from the territory wasn't tracked. They didn't keep track of it. So part of the problem with the case was trying to get an idea of exactly what the wealth was. So there were competing numbers from our experts and the Crown experts. But it was significant. It was in the hundreds of billions of dollars generated from the territory. That's not just Crown revenue, it's the wealth generated in other sources of revenue, according to our expert, who was Joseph Stiglitz, of course, a renowned economist. Joseph Stiglitz looked at different ways of calculating what the wealth from the territory was, and one of them was to figure out what's called economic rent, which is basically what was the economic value of the territory. How much wealth did it generate? Not just in Crown resource revenues, which is basically royalties, but of course beyond royalties you have companies generating their own profits, and you have income tax generated from employees that are working for those companies. So if you put that all together, that's what the economic rent was, rather than just revenues generated by the Crown, which is a much smaller number.
At first, it was the chiefs that got the collective amount and distributed. But what happened, soon after the treaty was signed was that the Crown, Indian Affairs took over the list. There are a lot of inequities that were created as a result of their control of that list. Ontario and Canada are arguing that our treaty is an individual right, not a collective right. I worry about our own politics and our own community members who think that the $4 is all that their treaty is, which is a big lie, because our treaty is so much more than the $4. Our treaty is about a collective right.
Something to think about, our community members, is that what are we looking for in the long term? Where are we going to sit? What are we going to vision? What our future is going to be like for the next 150 years. That's our grandkids, our great-great-grandchildren. When it comes to that, signing that dotted line, when it comes to the agreements for the 150 years of our Robinson Huron Treaty.
You see things on social media about 100% payout and demands for all of it, which really doesn't allow us to, consider all of the generations that came before us and to think about future generations. A lot of our members are talking about and dreaming about what this money could mean for their communities, and this has the potential impact to really make a huge difference for a lot of people.
I've been working on this case for about 30 years. If we're able to get this annuity where it should be, we would have the revenue through that to do the same things that happen in the cities so that we can better care for our people.
The roads need fixing. There's so many things. We need a nursing home, and because a lot of our elders are getting to that age. So this is good for the ones that are thinking about utilizing that money to help them, with a better life.
The trial was done in 3 stages. The first stage was about what's called in law justiciability of the augmentation promise, an interpretation of the treaty augmentation promise, and is it enforceable in law? Stage 1. Stage 2 was about Crown defenses of limitations and Crown immunity. We won Stage 1, we also won Stage 2. Stage 3 is about the go forward component of this, and that hasn't yet been dealt with.
In particular, we have a strong mandate from the 21 chiefs and villages in the area that entered into the treaty. The mandate is to bring honor to the promise for an annual payment to our people as a fair share of the revenues that were generated on our lands. The weight is heavy on us to do this in a good way.
The Crown has interpreted treaty as a contract. These agreements in which Indigenous nations ceded parts of their territory. But of course, that's the kind of narrative that when one thinks about it for very long, they realize it's built on pretty unstable ground. What people would ever sell large portions of their land for almost nothing? And that narrative really rests on an assumption that we were naive about the value of our territories, or that we were naive about what was even happening. An interesting presumption, because if we were just naive about what was happening, then that wouldn't actually be a legal contract.
The minister saying to the chiefs, we accept, and we're going to negotiate just the terms. The problem is, this settles the past, but it also doesn't set a precedent between Canada and Ontario about who pays for the future.
The settlement was for past compensation only, and it was in the global amount of $10 billion. That was to deal with the past. There'll be an opportunity for the 21 First Nations, however that may look in the future, to continue benefiting from the wealth generated from the territory. Our people need to see themselves in this settlement agreement, including the inclusion of Anishinaabe laws and protocols within the settlement agreement.
And so some of the chiefs have been coming to me and saying, like the AFN class action, we want financial literacy, we want supports, like we want to be ready, because if we do a per capita distribution, we want to do everything we can to make sure our people don't harm themselves with this money. Educate them as to what will happen when the money comes, because what we've heard from First Nations that do annual distributions, it's the predators that are the biggest problem.
There are people, and we must try to protect them as much as we can.
We've had our share of curveballs and close calls. They come at us every day. If we had a choice to give up and get gone, well, it's one we'd never...
We're going to have a press conference to announce to the world that we've settled part of our litigation against Canada and Ontario. I'm excited, I'm happy, and there's just no really good words for me to express how I feel, the gratitude that I have to have this finally done after all these years. Yeah.
There was a momentum that started. You had to have been there to really picture and feel that momentum starting to shift. So we introduced them to something that we were determined to do, not by an act of violence, but by way of ceremony, something that was outlawed years back. And I think sometimes our minds are still there. We're still in the state of being outlawed. But this way is a beautiful life. The songs were always there. We just needed to know what they were and to sing them.
Leroy Bennett walked as that Mishomis years ago when it started out in Thunder Bay. He was alone. There was no female, the grandmother. My involvement with RHT began almost 4 years ago when I was asked to be the grandmother. You need balance in everything. And so that balance, by having a grandmother with the RHT, really brought it together, that unity. And beginning with ceremony is always what we do.
So for this ceremony, the 6 gentlemen that you see in here, they're all going to share a few words about today.
Our people have been waiting forever and ever and ever and talked about this in our villages forever, and finally we can see a brighter day. We've just not been able to do much about it until now. So we got our foot in the door now. The work will begin.
It's a day of celebration, and our people have waited a long time for this. So, miigwech to the Creator, miigwech to the grandfathers and the grandmothers, miigwech to the ancestors that have helped us along this journey, and miigwech to the elders who have guided us in ceremony.
What took 5 years to negotiate has taken 173 years to truly honor. And I think that's something to recognize. Because trees are what built this country, and these ones in particular are the ones that laid the groundwork for what has happened over the rest of the country.
My mom's name was Bezagishgokwe, which means she leaves a mark in the sky, which means a legacy, an important legacy, a lasting legacy. And so the legacy, I think, would be that idea of resurgence, rebuilding, revitalizing the language, and the building of the Anishinaabe, or rebuilding of the Anishinaabe identity and purpose as a nation and as a collectivity. The language is so important that part of the funds that are generated from this litigation and the go-forward negotiations, whatever that is, need to be dedicated to promoting Anishinaabe.
When we think about the 7 generations ahead, you know, what would be there available for them, you know, to learn the language?
It's really only through treaty that Canada has any legal foundation to exist. And I think this is actually why Canada has been so reluctant, because their own legal foundations rest on treaties. You know, I think it's really through an enactment of our treaty relationships that we all benefit from finding ways to make this place home.
Nilan Waawiindamaagewin dit nakas. Van dodem. We keep an issue given out mark. Not here on the good. We can pongeri vinjava. Igeniga Caretakers Anishinaabek manda we not keep mark. Waawiindamaagewin Anishinaabek. Dus geni mangi question go we kid young go. Manda Eschige Ongnangwa. We know got just set Anishinaabe. Mena Chigama. Anch we matched out. We know we didn't got it on the kit. You know, we know we not more the Schnabel. As a wind mag out. What Piggy Peshkarado 1850 year is the card. We just any no as a Nakitamang. On the Jonia is na card. I will tell you the Tenzin Jonia. O Schme, the Tenda, what would care. Ilina Mapi and a Schnare and the Madzit. Jemnado, you win the Magona, Mampi, anywhere. We knocked in him, okay. Panedish, Makwendano, Yeni, he knocked it Marmanda. Idish, we the Margay on work on the Jonia. Yabo, Nibnagero, we knock it Mar. Kino Enchiang, Winsastana, Miao, should knock it Mako, or Jonia. Waawiindamaagewin de spie, just say on can botcher me, na wayne ka jindana on the joebok. You just get in the call, okay, yeah, you watch.
Have the treaties been broken? I would say probably every single one has. The renewal was important, and I think what this case has done is it's brought about a resurgence around the Robinson Huron Treaty and the entitlements that come with the treaty, of making people proud of who they are.
We're human beings. It's time for us to start treating each other that way. We are a nation. We have our own way of life, and that we have the ability to make these decisions that affect us, but there are decisions.
So it's good that we continue that educational piece for everybody, that they're aware of how our ancestors lived on this land and how they saw it as sacredness, the sacredness of this land, the waters, the air, you know, and And I just strongly believe that we continue that message for the ones that are coming, the ones that are going to be here, 7 generations behind.